A very good day to you all. Thank you for joining us for the February 2010 edition of Cloud Computing Uncovered. I'm Peter Coffey, Director of Platform Research at Salesforce.com, and this month's webinar is titled The Cloud as Enterprise Tool, with emphasis on integration in all directions. I'm the same Peter Coffey who used to write for eWeek and PC Week. I keep running into people who think I'm still there, but I've been with Salesforce.com now for going on 3 years. And during that time, it's been a very broadening experience of meeting with CIOs and developers and partners in a lot of places around the world and seeing enormous uptake for the cloud model. And in many of those places, I keep running into today's guest expert, Jeff Kaplan, founder and managing director at ThinkStrategies. Jeff and I have actually found each other speaking at the same event in places ranging from Georgia to Nevada. And I'm always pleased to have him for what I'm confident is going to be a very stimulating and well-founded set of observations about what is happening in the marketplace today. Jeff, tell us a little bit about ThinkStrategies.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, Peter. I'm like a bad penny. I do keep on popping up whenever we're talking about cloud computing and software as a service and all the rest, and you and I do find ourselves in the same places as a result on an ongoing basis. And ThinkStrategies is a business, a consulting business, which I did found back in 2001 when a lot of people were fleeing the idea of web-based services. I really thought we were on the cusp of a new phase or new stage of the evolution of the technology industry in which the technology or product centricity of this industry was going to shift to a more services-driven model. And I found that ThinkStrategies with that big bet in mind and have been focusing my attention and working with clients in the three areas you see here: IT and business decision makers within enterprise organizations, solution providers who are trying to determine how these new kinds of services-driven solutions are going to affect their go-to-market strategies, and a whole lot of investors, of course, who are trying to figure out which ponies to bet on and how to get those horses across the finish line.
You know, I think I saw in just the latest issue of Wired a profile of sort of a where are they now thing for people, ideas, and companies on the 10th anniversary of the NASDAQ hitting its all-time peak. And of course, you came in the year after that when a lot of people thought that .com was synonymous with .bomb. I remember at eWeek we were saying at about the same time you started ThinkStrategies, look, if you've got a fundamentally sound business and you use the web to accelerate it and streamline it, that's going to be good. If you have a completely silly idea, adding .com to it is not going to make it a better idea. And it seems as if a decade later, we pretty much demonstrated that that was the reality.
Well, you know, a large part of it is, and we're going to get into this, I know, with the substance of today's session, is that the technology industry has been great at coming up with new ideas, which usually take about a decade to come to fruition. But in this particular case, it did have to take a while to fully bake. And by that I mean what we needed to do was bring the right enabling technologies to bear, as well as evolve the business model to support them. But most importantly, of course, what we have in today's economic environment, and we began to see back in 2001, the demise of the dot-com era, is an economic driver, which is accelerating or escalating user demand and interest in these kinds of cloud-based alternatives.
Let's take a look at that picture. Here we are in 2010, and the state of the cloud is really quite astonishing. When you talk with companies about their readiness to adopt the cloud, horizontal services like mail, increasingly the use of collaboration tools and office suite type environments like Google Docs is no longer considered bleeding edge. You find that the people who have tried it plan to stay with it. This does not look like a pendulum swing at all, but rather a case where once certain curves cross and the cost of doing one thing one way becomes obviously less than the cost of doing it an older, less efficient way, people don't go back. 70% of current cloud users plan to expand their use of the cloud, and critically, one of the things I'm seeing is that those who have found it to be reliable and capable and easy to use for straightforward tasks like email are now very ready to start adopting it for vertical stuff.
And you know what also, yeah. Peter? We've been tracking the SaaS component of this marketplace, which we believe has been the precursor to the broader movement towards the cloud.
Yes.
And back in 2008, we saw that adoption rate crossed the two-thirds mark. Greater than 66% of companies were adopting some form of SaaS. And at that stage, we were seeing plus 90% satisfaction, renewal, and most importantly, willingness to refer others to those SaaS solutions, which again, as you well know, being in the business, any company who's in a cloud or services kind of business has to depend upon those kinds of satisfaction and renewal levels in order to survive, because you cannot succeed with a tremendous amount of churn. And that's where the alignment comes in around customer success. But it's no surprise as a result, these kinds of statistics, which are showing the same kind of pattern evolving in the broader array of cloud services that are now available.
And in fact, a major survey on brand name value came out just today, describing Amazon as now the most trusted brand in the country, based on exactly what you were just saying. It's about trust and recommendation. And of course, one of the key measures of trust for the cloud is, are people ready to use it to build new value upon their existing foundations? And of course, are they satisfied with the security? And I don't use security merely to mean protection, but also availability, uptime, confidentiality, data integrity. Whether this is really ready for prime time, because the economies can be as compelling as you like. There are some industries in which, if you don't establish that readiness for prime time as an enterprise tool, the economies really don't matter. And that's why I really feel that this year, Jeff, and tell me if you agree, is a good year for going beyond what I'll call Cloud 101. I feel as if I spent the last 3 years during my time here at Salesforce.com going out into a room where people had heard the word cloud and wanted to be told what it means. And I think I'm going to be finding a lot more people this year who feel they pretty much know what cloud means. And now they want to start talking in a much more nuanced way and at a much more enterprise-ready level of, how do I use this to do large-scale, mission-critical things in a way that's secure, governable, auditable, and so on. And tell me if you see that same kind of transition to what I guess we would call the Cloud 201 level.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. We've moved beyond the what is cloud and the why should I be thinking about the cloud to how do I make cloud work for my business, and how do I achieve my corporate objectives by leveraging this rapidly evolving set of service capabilities.
And Jeff, I believe that it was you who said in a recent paper that led me to put it on this bullet chart that the participants are seeing now. I believe you made the very specific statement that demand for integration tools and services is going to, I think your verb was, soar, and that specialized value-added resellers, we're going to start seeing the cloud as the place where they make their money.
Yeah, absolutely. In many ways, it gets back to the old gold rush idea, in which it was the folks who sold the shovels and provided the professional services to those miners who ended up becoming wealthy as a result. And that's why I tend to refer to today's era as being a cloud rush effect, in which those folks who were able to bring the right tools to facilitate the integration of these kinds of services and are able to cater the tools, that is, mold them into shape to meet specific business requirements, are again going to be the winners.
I also feel as if a label that's been abused a lot over the last 10 years, which is solution provider, may finally now start to see some concrete reality, because it used to be, if you wanted to go into an enterprise and say, I can solve this major problem for you, here are the 90% of my people who will be helping you acquire and install infrastructure, and here are the 10% who will be actually solving the business problem. I really feel like we can dramatically reverse those ratios, and now maybe one person whose job is to make sure that the routers are working, and the other 90% of the team are people with very specific expertise in pharmaceutical industry compliance or logistics across national borders, or whatever is the business problem that you need addressed.
Absolutely agreed. And to a certain extent, the excitement about what companies like Amazon have done to commoditize the infrastructure as a service layer of cloud computing is an indication of how the technological aspects of this new world are not necessarily being simplified, but standardization and automation are reducing the amount of attention we have to spend at that level so that we can, in fact, dedicate greater resources to finally address the business-driven aspects of most corporations' challenges.
Well, you and I have agreed, I think, and we'll continue to agree that people get the cloud, they understand it means elastic scalability of their capacity, dramatic lowering of your capital investment barriers to entry, both money and time for capital budgeting processes and so on. And if we want to follow through on this idea that this is the year of Cloud 201, what do you feel, Jeff, are the least understood opportunities for using the cloud?
What's important to note here is, especially for some of those solution providers that you were mentioning before, who tend to fear the cloud because they're afraid of being disintermediated by it, that while there's no question that the success of software as a service and now the expansion of the widening array of cloud services does offer a opportunity to accelerate the deployment of applications and systems and to increase, or I should say compress, the time to value of those resources as well, it doesn't entirely eliminate the need for both integration tools as well as professional service skills to bring these resources together. And that's what I'm trying to point out here. That, first of all, there is going to be a hybrid environment that we're all going to be living within for many years to come, because there's not only a sunk cost in terms of legacy on-premise applications, but there may be actually some justification for some of those systems to continue to linger for many years to come.
Yeah.
Therefore, the only way today's cloud capabilities can really enhance those embedded systems and applications is by, of course, working tightly with them and being properly integrated to them. So that's the first step, which is having the right level of cloud and legacy integration. The second piece, which I refer to as kind of narrowing the space between the dots, is the growing array of toolkits, whether it's application programming interfaces, or APIs, or a growing assortment of very innovative connector-type tools that are being provided by a wide assortment of new and established integration tools vendors, or other kinds of capabilities through web services to narrow the gap between various applications, database systems, and the rest, so that, again, the integration challenge from a technological point of view can be reduced, and the focus, therefore, on the business level of the application functionality can become much more the focus of service organizations as well as the enterprise themselves. So we see a new generation, by the way, of service providers in the form of consulting firms and value-added resellers who are taking up that charge and are demonstrating that there are new ways of, in fact, leveraging the cloud to deliver those services.
Mm-hmm. Let me drill in a little bit on some of your bullets here. You talk about cloud to legacy integration. I routinely get asked, if I'm propounding a belief that the cloud replaces the data center, and I say, think about all the things you've got in your data center that are working just fine, but they're really only usable by people who are at headquarters or at a very minimum in one of your fixed office locations. What would it mean if some of that stuff could be on people's iPhones, and if making things available in a secure and managed way to a cloud platform allowed you to start deploying things to people in the field in weeks rather than years? Are you seeing strong take-up for the idea of making more capability available to people on their handhelds?
Oh, no question about it. And, of course, there are very few organizations who have the in-house skills to figure out how to properly deploy and manage those resources when it extends to the endpoint, in this case, smartphones and the rest. But the more we become accustomed through our consumer experiences to that level of functionality being literally at our fingertips, the more we expect as end users and corporate executives, and the same thing will be the case in our corporate lives. And if we can't be able to depend on our internal IT resources to provide that functionality, and there's no reason why we should expect it per se, then we're going to be looking for outside expertise to augment, not replace, but augment our internal resources in those very important areas.
And when you look at how short the technology cycle time is in the consumer handheld device space, where 18 months is a long time in the evolution of handheld clients, you simply cannot expect an enterprise IT team to be developing and redeveloping apps on that cycle when you've got cloud providers who are prepared to offer a handheld device deployment solution where you just worry about it at the interface level or at the connector level.
Absolutely. And what we're seeing here is an acceleration of technological innovation that really puts the old principles of core versus context that Jeffrey Moore talked about many years ago into a new realm. Before we might have looked at simple telecom services as being something that weren't our proficiency, and therefore we turned to a telco to help us out there. And today, the same thing holds true with a widening array of cloud-based services.
No, I distinctly remember 20 years ago I was doing site visits to the factories of telecom providers who were building the PBX that we might put into the basement of the company. And being the telecom manager today, I suspect, doesn't involve nearly as many tours of PBX factories, and is much more now a matter of sitting down and talking about contract terms.
Well, it's ironic, and I don't want to date either you or myself, Peter, but the fact is that we both probably got our starts around the same time, and one of my early jobs in this industry was back in 1983 helping to launch IDC's telecommunications research program at the time of the AT&T divestiture. And back then, the big argument was, would telco-centric services survive in the face of that PBX onslaught?
Yeah.
And I was one of the few who said, you know what, there's always going to be an opportunity for a service provider to provide basically a subscription service alternative to an on-premise system for those companies who don't see the justification for buying and installing and managing and maintaining that system. And sure enough, Centrex services continue to do a very healthy business in today's world, and they represent one model for success that the new generation of cloud services are emulating.
And the differentiation of what the industry used to whimsically call POTS, or POTS, plain old telephone service, as a vehicle for delivering services like voicemail, like any number of other value adds, and even British Telecom adding to their small business suite things like reselling Salesforce CRM under the BT label.
Yep. Well, even in simpler terms, of course, it's always been about, for the telcos and now for cloud companies, how they can create a portfolio or suite, as you put it, of related services with built-in integration capabilities. Back in the day, getting voicemail was a big deal, right? Call forwarding was a big deal.
Yeah.
Now it's, of course, converting that voice message to an email or text message. And as the telcos have learned, so are cloud service providers, but more importantly, corporate decision makers, that the new enabling technologies are permitting this new generation of functionality to really be a viable alternative to traditional in-house data center oriented systems and solutions.
Let's talk about enablement. A decade ago, we used the label SOA a lot for the idea that instead of applications being monoliths of code with their own associated data stores, they should start to be more exposed to other applications with opportunities to interact with things. Is SOA still relevant? Is it even more relevant than ever, only we just don't use the label a lot?
Yeah, SOA is how this stuff gets done, and to a certain extent, the beauty of cloud computing and the beauty of software as a service is that once the customer gets comfortable with the idea, they don't really want to know how the sausage was made, and that's why in many cases SOA doesn't get the kind of attention that it probably deserves, because it is a cornerstone to success in this brave new world. But the fact is that it's also being adopted in such a way that it is, as your third bullet points out, part of the culture of delivering successful cloud services, rather than in and of itself being a technology solution as it was originally conceived.
Yeah, well, I think that was one of the early things that happened, is that first we started talking about SOA as a way of doing things, and then, like so many other ideas, it grew an industry of products around it, and people said, oh, well, if I install an enterprise service bus, then I will have SOA. Well, no, not really. That might happen, but it's not going to be a direct consequence of installing technology. And I always feel as if you sort of need to get people to think, my power is not the asset that I control and the data to which I function as gatekeeper, but instead is from the leverage that I offer and the power that I create for other business units and other stakeholders in the company by making services available to them. I think it is a different way of thinking about what your power base is.
Yeah, in fact, I refer to it as kind of an inversion process. By that I mean that we're really turning inside out the very nature of how we look at technology. As you may recall in the first slide that you asked me to refer to when talking about the origins of ThinkStrategies, this whole idea of the technology industry moving from being product-centric to being services-driven is a very, very fundamental shift in not only the way vendors come to market, and there's huge challenges there, but in the way in which IT and business decision makers adopt technology. When you're thinking about adopting technology in the form of services, you're thinking about it in a different way and evaluating your vendors in a different fashion than you would if you're simply looking at acquiring technologies and going through all the heartache of trying to deploy and maintain and manage that technology.
Well, Jeff, where, in your experience with the clients that you see, where's the thought leadership happening here? Is the IT organization going to the rest of the enterprise and saying, we can do a better job for you if you can stomach the idea that data might not be stored physically on our premises but might be stored elsewhere? Are they providing that education, or is it the other way around? The business unit is coming to IT and saying, get over the idea that we want you to be custodians, we want you to be business process enablers, and if that means using external services, we want you, IT, to become comfortable with that.
Well, we can't paint the world with a single brush, but there's no question that the greater force of those two scenarios is the latter, which is it is a business-driven phenomenon that's gotten us to this point of a combination of factors, in fact. Number one, growing frustration among the business end users and corporate executives with the level of return that they've seen from their traditional technology investments. Number two, again, as I mentioned earlier, the consumer effect. That is, our lives seem to be getting so much easier and even more enjoyable because of technology in our private lives. Why is it that our professional lives continue to be encumbered by technology, right? What's happened is kind of an evolutionary process here. First of all, there was some clandestine adoption of these cloud-based services, initially in the form of SaaS, and then with the advent of Amazon on the infrastructure layer. When folks found that this stuff worked, they started to admit to their sins and say, hey, we've adopted this stuff. We now need some help from IT, possibly integrating it with some of the legacy systems because we want to enhance that investment. And they've either demanded or encouraged IT to get involved. Now, in some organizations where you have an enlightened IT operation, IT is taking a little bit more of the lead. But unfortunately, it's been more on the business side that we've seen the leadership here, not on the IT side.
Now, I know that I've seen a number of stories lately about the increasing number of people who have a title like CIO in the organization who didn't come up through the ranks of the data center but came across into that role from a business unit. Are you running into more CIOs or people with a CIO type of role who are not technologists but are in that role because they were asked to get in there and make it more of a strategic business?
Absolutely. It's often the business executive who complained the most about the nature of the internal IT operation, who was then fingered basically to try to fix the problem.
Uh-huh.
And
So
what we're seeing
the CIO now is a lot closer to being a process guy than a technology guy, or
and the vendor manager in a sense. So they're going out looking for the best of breed and best strategic sources for these kinds of services. In much the same way as the previous generation may have thought about traditional outsourcing, but was never really satisfied with that model because it was an either-or kind of situation.
Yeah.
The way I like to look at where we're at today is a term that I refer to as outtasking, where you can take a look at specific tasks that need to be done in the form of applications or systems and find a suitable solution provider to respond to that need, test them in incremental ways to make sure that they can meet their promises or fulfill their promises, and then incrementally grow that relationship and shift the burden with far less risk associated with it than the traditional outsourcing model.
Now, that label of outtasking, that strikes me as contributing a lot of value to the conversation. If I say outsourcing, it implies I know exactly what I want done. Here, you go do this piece. As if I go out and hire, a truck driver instead of calling up FedEx and saying, I've got a logistics problem here. What's your recommendation?
Well, the way I like to put it is, outsourcing was a euphemism for outplacement for too many IT people, and all they did was move the stinky cheese from the internal data center to the outsourcer's data center with very little value add along the way.
Yeah.
And that's why better than 50% of those traditional deals failed to meet their business objectives and were either terminated or substantially restructured before the end of their term. It wasn't a pretty scene, and by the way, that's also why the previous generation of application service providers and traditional hosting of enterprise apps hasn't worked either, because again, you're just transferring something that's broken to somebody who you're hoping is going to either fix it for less or at least maintain it for less long-term, and you still are forced to withstand the limitations associated with that.
Okay, so you have to be really careful what it is that you try to do with the cloud, because if you lovingly preserve the complex, cumbersome, time-consuming process you have now, but have it running in a virtualized environment, it's still going to be complex, time-consuming, and cumbersome.
Absolutely, and this is where we get back to the whole integration issue, because hopefully when you're looking at integration, you're not just applying a Band-Aid to a bad situation. You are, in fact, trying to move to a better portfolio, we'll call it, of resources and assets to achieve your business objectives.
Well, if you anticipate that this is a transition that's going to happen for you either very soon or definitely within the foreseeable, next year or two, what are the things that you should be doing now to keep your options open for that process to take place?
Well, there's a lot of cloud vendors and wannabes who have entered this marketplace. As I said earlier, we're seeing a cloud rush effect, and some of the players are doing great work and are visionary and pioneers in their parts of the cloud environment. Others, of course, are simply rebranding themselves to take advantage of a hot idea.
Yeah.
So the first thing you have to do is you have to look under the covers and get a good understanding of their core competencies and true corporate objectives, and ensure that you're not getting boxed in by adopting solutions that have an open API orientation to them, so that obviously they can tie into your legacy systems, but also tie into additional cloud services you may be adding on, again, in reference to that outtasking idea that I suggested earlier. So that's the first thing I would suggest. You might want to add your own point of view on that one.
No, go on. Well, one of the first things I'm hearing from you is if someone says, we have a complete, comprehensive, does-it-all solution in the cloud, that sounds like a double-edged promise, because it doesn't sound like they're emphasizing interoperability and synergy with the other services in the cloud that arguably represent distinctive expertise.
Yeah, and in truth, I don't know if there's anybody who's been around long enough since the cloud itself has only been really fleshing itself out over the past few years who can honestly claim that they've got it all. It's the companies who have recognized that they're trying to certainly meet the broadest cross-section of needs of their customers, but are also recognizing that one of the inherent values of the cloud is this openness that it represents, and therefore they are looking to build an ecosystem of third-party relationships which extends their value and provides greater support to their customers. And speaking of customers, they're the greatest proof point for these kinds of solutions. One of the great things about the times we live in is all of the visibility it gives us to the good, bad, and the ugly of software as a service and cloud computing. So we're seeing a growing list of success stories. We're also hearing about some of the shortcomings, which are obviously going to be part of the stage that we're at with cloud computing. But both are readily available to us through the internet. All you have to do is search for them, or test your potential vendors by asking them to cough up these stories so that you can be sure that they really do have the functional capabilities, but also the integration support capabilities, either internally or through, again, that ecosystem of third-party relationships to ensure that their solution properly fits within a real-world environment, namely yours.
As we've been speaking just now, one question has come in from one of our participants. I'm going to inject it in now instead of waiting for the Q&A. The question is, are there sources that provide evidence of real, and he capitalized the word real, dollar savings with cloud initiatives, and where are they? Now, I know that we have a directory of customer stories on the Salesforce.com site, which are sorted by industry and by size of company and others. And I feel that those are very persuasive, incredible stories. There's some that I love to tell, but hey, I'm working for the vendor. You're out there, in the marketplace, talking with people, embarking on, or maybe getting into the second phase of cloud adoptions. If someone walks up to you and says, "Okay, I've heard all this cloud hype. Are people really saving money with this?" What would your answer be?
Oh, absolutely. And I'll do a little self-promotion here, if you don't mind. That is a part of what ThinkStrategies has built in terms of its consultancy is also represented in terms of an online directory we created 2 or 3 years ago now called the SaaS Showplace. And people can find it by simply going to ThinkSaaS.com. And a year ago, we initiated a Best of SaaS Showplace Awards program aimed at doing exactly this. That is, bringing attention to those SaaS solutions that are generating tangible, measurable, quantifiable business benefits to their customers. And that could be in the form of cash savings, if you will, or greater revenue generation, or reduced time to market, things of that nature that are, in fact, measurable. And I have to admit the reason we did it a year ago is because we were a little concerned that with the downturn in the economy, there may have been a backlash towards this cloud computing and SaaS movement, and especially because, not every company is going to survive, and if there were isolated cases of a SaaS company, in fact, going out of business, I was afraid that it might lead to the same dot-com bubble burst that we saw back in the original.
You wanted to get in early and say, look, hey, here's the reality check. Before you start wondering if this is all hype, here are real measurable outcomes.
Absolutely. And every week since that initial announcement, we've been issuing awards to companies, and we have now well over 40 who are, in fact, in small and big ways, delivering tangible, measurable business benefits to their customers. So the answer is absolutely yes.
These are not so much awards for products as recognitions of successful deployments.
Absolutely.
Okay, and that's ThinkSaaS.com?
Yep, and on that site, you'll see in the navigation on the left where it lists Best of SaaS Showplace Awards. You'll see a link to those 40-plus companies who have won awards over the past year or so.
Okay.
And it's an ongoing program, so we'll be continuing to search for additional companies who are doing good things as well.
Great. Now, that actually leads me into another question, which is, what do you find to be the path by which people adopt this? And I'll give you an example, and then you can tell me if you think it's typical or if there are other models that you think are at least as important. We had one customer at the Phoenix companies, which knew they wanted to replace an old, outdated, brittle legacy CRM system with a better CRM. They looked at us as part of the universe of options just for doing what they thought was going to be a CRM replacement project, liked the idea of going with a SaaS solution, a software as a service solution for the CRM, embarked on that process, then discovered that because of the connectivity and integratability of a cloud platform, things that had previously been in separate applications could now be knitted in directly. And instead of getting to a certain point in the deal and then now going over to another tool to do the contract, you would now be able to just click on a button within an opportunity and be in the tool or be in the function directly within the Force.com environment to start doing the contract. By the time they were done, they had spent a quarter of their original planned budget to do a substantial consolidation of what had previously been separate siloed applications, achieved 96% adoption, and increased the associated volume of business by a third. So, 75% less money than they planned to spend, 33% increase in the associated business. That's what I think of as a typical success story where they come to the cloud with a particular thing they want to get and then discover, and then it sort of blossoms outward from there. Do you feel that's a successful model?
Yeah, no question about it. Again, it's starting with a very specific business objective in mind, being able to roll out that initial app to address that objective in a far quicker time frame than we could have ever imagined in the past, finding that it's generating tangible results very quickly as well. And in fact, a part of the fundamental attributes of all these cloud services is a management platform that sits on top of it, which allows the user to get greater visibility about utilization levels.
Yes.
Right? Yes. And being able to not only see and feel and track that utilization, but very often, in fact, I hear stories about organizations, corporations, who are getting such positive feedback from their end users that other departments are, in essence, envious, and they want to get on board. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And this, again, leads to additional integration requirements, but at the same time helps to speak to how this is a business-driven phenomenon that is obviously being fueled by the initial success within specific, rather isolated deployments in many cases, but ones that have very serious enterprise-wide implications long-term.
And to me, that's one of the most really exciting things about the cloud marketplace today is that instead of this being the latest genius idea from the propeller heads in the basement, and everyone just kind of groans at the notion of, oh no, now we have to learn this new thing. It's a matter of, there's a lot of tension on the rope, and you're just trying to pay the rope out at a sustainable rate to deliver new capability to people who are hungry for it.
Yep. Yeah, no question. The way I like to look at it, to put it in context to the overall terminology of cloud computing, when I first started ThinkStrategies, one of the hot buzzwords was utility computing. And the tech companies, the traditional tech companies of IBM, HP, Sun, took hold of that idea and basically ground it into mush because they made it too technical. And there are terms like autonomic, which most people couldn't even enunciate, right? And they had a hard time translating the technical capabilities of that promise of utility computing into true business benefits that everybody could understand. And the idea died. And it took an Amazon, who nobody saw coming, to translate that using a new generation of enabling technologies, but a business-oriented approach to the idea to bring it to fruition. And now, of course, many others are doing the same. And with the Salesforce's credit, it pioneered this space on the SaaS side and has helped to evangelize its greater capabilities across the cloud landscape, so to speak.
I felt a chill wind down the back of my neck when you used the word autonomic just now, because I almost used that in a tweet this morning and thought, nah. spending too much time at IBM Almaden Research Laboratories if I think the word autonomic is actually appealing to anybody. So, we're talking then about how do you make this happen? How do you take existing assets, then go look for cloud options that maximize connectivity with connector products, with fully disclosed application interfaces, with an emphasis on saying, look, here's what we do really well. We want to help you get full value out of this burgeoning cloud marketplace in which other people do other things really well. What's the kind of partner you want to find to help you make that happen instead of you trying to gain 5 years of perspective on the cloud marketplace in the 5 months that you want to spend getting your project deployed?
Well, it starts with having the right technical expertise from that solution provider who obviously has to be able to demonstrate that they do understand the technological underpinnings of what enables the cloud to be what it is today. So understanding what's happening in terms of not so much just virtualization and some of the infrastructure pieces that go along with it, but also understanding again, around the topic of today's talk, how you go about deploying these kinds of solutions in such a way that they can be properly integrated into your broader corporate portfolio of IT resources and software solutions.
So we're not looking necessarily now for an infantry of people with networking and server configuring certifications, but we're really looking for people who are much more able to engage with the business unit than people who can beat a server into submission.
No question about it. Excuse me. The new generation of cloud computing integration and consulting firms are very nimble, agile, if you will, teams who know how to get to the core of the matter, built upon those legacy infrastructures that you referred to. I mean, obviously the router-based networks are the enabling underpinning to a lot of what is making the internet what it is today. But this is a different layer of competency that brings business value to that asset. And you're going to want to make sure that they understand the technological nuances there, but also that they have a proven track record of success in like-minded companies or organizations like yours, and can translate that competency into a business orientation that can deliver real tangible value in a short period of time, and maybe in an incremental fashion, so that you can not only assure success but mitigate the risks along the way.
Okay. Let's talk about risk mitigation. We've had several questions come in from participants while we've been talking, and one of their main questions is, okay, if I succeed in building a system where I take advantage of open APIs from a system like Salesforce CRM, I take advantage of handheld device deployment options. Now, what used to be just a headquarters system of record, maybe an SAP ERP suite or a big massive Oracle database, is now delivering actionable information to my people in the field, and all this is goodness. But now I've got data that sit up in someone else's systems instead of mine. And I'm being asked two questions. One, how do I make sure I can get it when I want it? And two, how do I deal with things like e-discovery requests and litigation? Or am I going to find that I'm no longer in control of that? Do you run into a lot of people with concerns about data custody and data residency as one of the main pain points in selling a cloud integration strategy?
All the time. The fact of the matter is, those are legitimate questions and concerns. You should be asking those questions. And by the same token, the cloud vendor you are considering should have a very simple set of answers for you. No, your data isn't going to be at risk. Yes, you can get it back. And here's our SLA. Here's our contract to ensure that in fact is the case. Also, here are the mechanisms that we put in place to protect your data while it resides in our cloud, but also to tell you what the steps are in case you decide you want to take that data back, or for some other reason you need to take that data back. In terms of e-discovery, there's an army of lawyers who are setting certain standards, if you will, and best practices for how those kinds of issues should be dealt with as well. And by the way, a lot of companies I talk to admit that they see the cloud vendor as possibly being their resolution of their own internal shortcomings when it comes to managing their data. Most companies have not done a very good job on their own handling that legacy issue.
Yeah.
And to a certain extent, they're hoping that some of the cloud vendors who they may engage with can help them cross that chasm.
Well, I remember seeing a number of fairly high-profile stories over the last decade about companies that were, at a minimum, severely chastised, and in some cases, very substantially fined by judges for failure to make timely and complete disclosure of information that had been demanded under rules of civil procedure and so on. And it does seem to me that if you're working with a cloud solution provider, you're not going to have to go spelunking through the PCs looking for files that are only in one place, and that's on some individual person's desktop machine. But you might be able to start having a much more organized, demonstrably auditable, provable compliance with a discovery order, because now you can say, look, this is the system we do our business on. Here's everything.
Well, you're absolutely right. If you choose the right cloud vendor,
right.
There are many cloud vendors who are trying to commoditize this marketplace, for instance, who are more than happy to take your data, and they'll maintain it in a secure fashion, but aren't providing that extra layer of e-discovery or backup and support that many enterprises demand. And these companies, therefore, are not proving to be very successful in serving the enterprise because they do not have the depth of capabilities that the enterprise is looking for when it comes to data protection, discovery, and all the rest, as you suggested.
Yeah.
So there's no question there are many who can, but again, it's up to the IT and business decision makers to work together to thoroughly evaluate the vendors they're considering to make sure that they're up to the specific standards they may need to live by.
So to use your own phrase, you can't paint this with just one brush. You can't make sweeping statements that the cloud is more or less discoverable, more or less reliable. It has the potential to be better on many dimensions than the way you do things now, but working with someone who uses the capability correctly and understands the business need that you're trying to fulfill is now the hard part, as opposed to someone, finding someone who can tune a database.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a vast new world that we've created here in the cloud. There are some great companies who are thinking about and responding to these kinds of challenges. There are other companies who are well-intended but have decided for a variety of reasons that they're not up to that level of rigor, and therefore they're solving the needs of a different segment of the marketplace. And unfortunately, there are a lot of companies who, again, in a cloud rush environment, are going to be jumping in without having put a lot of thought into this stuff and are reacting on the fly and maybe making false promises along the way.
Yeah. We had a number of questions come in asking if we're going to get beyond the level of conversation we're having now and do a demo. And I apologize to anyone who was expecting a Salesforce.com demo today. We're trying to meet a different need with this particular series of webinars. We do a lot of product-centered, Salesforce-centered events where we show stuff, offer training, offer demos of new features and things. But we also got a lot of requests from existing customers who wanted to lead the kind of contagion process that we were just talking about earlier, where they're having a lot of success in their unit, but they're trying to communicate what the cloud does and does not mean to other parts of their organization. And that's why you're not seeing Salesforce CRM or Salesforce integration tools specifically being demonstrated today. We are logging all of the questions coming in, and those of you who have made specific requests about, could you see a demo of X, Y, or Z, we will be trying to get back to you with links to event schedules and so on our website so that you're able to take advantage of a lot of that live interactive stuff. We really appreciate your interest in that, and I'm sorry if anyone didn't feel that need was being addressed correctly today. We do every month in these things do what we call the myth of the month thing, and it seemed to me that one of the pervasive myths of the cloud, Jeff, tell me if you agree, is people thinking, well, the cloud is great, but it's just another IT silo. If I adopt a SaaS solution, it better be something completely generic, completely horizontal, completely self-contained, because they assume that connecting the cloud to what they have now is going to be a really difficult thing to do. Do you find that people tend to overestimate how hard that is?
Certainly there are some folks who want to look at this as a silo, or in fact, folks who believe it could be that. If they go in with that in mind, then they've missed the point.
Yeah.
What SaaS and cloud computing ought to be doing is, in fact, in many cases, especially in larger enterprises with an assortment of legacy systems and applications in place, it ought to be offering up a new layer of interoperability to that environment that actually brings new value to those legacy investments.
Certainly what we find is that most of the really interesting customer success stories, you've got your repository of outstanding deployments at ThinkStrategies.com. Anyone who goes to the Salesforce.com homepage and looks for the customers link will very quickly find an enormous repository of customer success stories with many quantifiable outcomes. But almost all of the really good stories involve connecting cloud resources to other resources. In fact, the chart that the participants are seeing now, that integration partner ecosystem box at lower right, is really important. Because if you think about it, the Informatica and Pervasive and Cast Iron and Tibco and other integration technology providers of the world, they've been creating new value out of heterogeneous IT environments for a long time. And for them, connecting with the cloud is not qualitatively different. It's just another leaf on the tree. So it's really important to appreciate that integration does multiply the value of the things you have now. I tell people the cloud is not going to make you look like you did something dumb 3 years ago. If you use the integration facilities correctly, everything you did 3 years ago is suddenly going to look smarter than it did before.
Yep.
And at this point, I'm going to remind people that we are a publicly traded company. Nothing that I've said today has been intended in any way to be any kind of forward-looking statement on what we will be doing in the future. I did get a couple of questions coming in about a new offering of ours called Chatter, which did begin a very highly discussed private beta process last week. I can't really add anything to that in this environment now, except to say that we're using Chatter internally now at Salesforce.com, and I can tell you the adoption has been incredible. It's already making a big reduction in unproductive email traffic and so on. We're really excited about it, and I hope to be talking more about that in a future Cloud Computing Uncovered. Now, at this point, Jeff, you and I are supposed to get into live Q&A, and that's pretty much what we have been doing for the last 15 minutes. I've been driving the discussion largely by the questions that have been coming in from participants on the site, and I hope that I've done a decent job of finding the clusters, which have been about things like exposure of data, compliance with e-discovery requests, custody issues, and so on. Jeff, is there anything that you particularly find has been a real light bulb moment for people in taking the idea of SaaS, the packaged application, and making it a much more powerful tool in combination with other IT assets? Is there any, if you can get 30 seconds with the CEO and say, look, this is what it might be really important for you to understand, what would you use that 30 seconds to discuss?
Well, the first thing would be, don't think of SaaS as being a one-size-fits-all. The evolution of this marketplace has really permitted us to make SaaS solutions much more configurable. And then getting back to that previous discussion around the silos idea, also don't think about SaaS as being an isolated solution to meet a specific need alone, but look at it as being a solution that you can use in an isolated fashion initially to test your comfort with it, but then apply across the organization in a very flexible fashion to meet a widening array of business requirements.
Fantastic. Jeff Kaplan with ThinkStrategies. Thanks so much for joining me this month on Cloud Computing Uncovered. I'm Peter Coffey with Salesforce.com. My email and Twitter addresses are both appearing on your screen momentarily. Please feel free to follow up with me directly if there are questions that we weren't able to get to, either for reasons of time or for reasons of specificity in the live Q&A channel from this webinar. We look forward to having you join us for future Cloud Computing Uncovered episodes. We will be talking about things like social networking and our emerging chatter capability. And please do give us an opportunity to get back to you with information on more specific demonstrations, orientations, feature introductions of Salesforce CRM, Force.com Cloud Platform, and of course the emerging chatter application category. We'd love to tell you more about what we do here at Salesforce.com. Thank you all so much for your time, and Jeff, thanks so much for being with us.
It's a pleasure.